Hi, it's me, Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut. Well, it's been a little bit since we've done another Spacewalk podcast, so it is time. And we've got one thing that has been captivating every question I see, everything. I mean, it's been about 2 weeks now since SpaceX caught the super heavy booster for Flight 5 of Starship. And all these questions, my friends, are all about this unbelievable moment. So that being said, I think this episode's almost entirely about that, except with one exception. So I guess with that, let's answer a bunch of questions about how exactly SpaceX caught the super heavy booster. So join me on this episode of Spacewalk Podcast. Welcome to episode 10 of Spacewalk Podcast. Okay, real quick at the top of the show here, I do need to remind you that we are in early bird ticket sales for the Astro Awards Live 2025. It's celebrating the achievements of 2024. It's our huge award show ceremony, and this year it's going to be even bigger because we're doing panels. It's a 2-day event now instead of a 1-day event. We'll have programming on Saturday, a party on Saturday night, more programming on Sunday, and then the actual Astro Awards award show. There's VIP packages. The Apogee, where you can have dinner with myself and some other people, is already sold out. Sorry about that. And then the VIP, like the meet and greet tickets, are almost sold out. And that's just from early bird tickets. We will announce the full lineup on November 1st. And when we do, I guarantee the rest of the tickets will sell out. So if you want 10% off of the tickets available through November 1st, go to astroawards.live. You won't want to miss out because it's going to be incredible. Austin, Texas, January 25th, 26th. Again, astroawards.live. Get your tickets now while they're 10% off and then after that, once we announce the lineup, I'll bet you they'll be sold out by December 1st. So get your tickets now because they will be sold out. Okay, onward. I like to kind of give you a little description of where I am when I'm doing these. Right now, I'm still in Austin, Texas. So those of you unfamiliar, in the winters, I end up spending most of my time down in Austin. That's where my girlfriend lives. And in the summers, I spend as much time as possible in Iowa. Austin's advantageous because of, the proximity to Starbase. And right now, I'm walking around just kind of on the in town, technically still within the city limits of Austin, but there's this weird little park thing that I like to walk through, and there's a giant TV radio antenna thing that's enormous. So I'm going to be walking right by it, and it's kind of spooky and ominous. When you just see structures this big, it's like Starship scale. Actually, it's probably bigger than Starship. Actually, well, I don't know. It's big. Anyway, that's where I am. As you might know, if you're a fan of the show and of Everyday Astronaut and what we do, obviously you're listening to this, so you're probably pretty familiar, but the craziest thing happened for Starship's 5th flight. As you know, since Starhopper days, I've dedicated as much physical, emotional, mental, monetary time, energy, love, sweat, blood, tears into capturing Starship. The only ones that I've missed out of any test flight was SN5 and 6, which were just basically repeats of Starhopper's tests with kind of boring cylinders. So they were pretty minor, and it was the height of pandemic craziness where traveling was, it was just sort of a no-no. So so those are the only ones that I missed. Other than that, I've seen every single Raptor-powered flying thing. In other words, I've only ever seen two individual Raptor engines that have not leave the ground, if that makes sense, until the 5th flight. And unfortunately, I only had 3 things in my calendar this year was there 3 weddings? Yeah, there were 3 weddings this year. First one didn't interfere with anything. Second one interfered with Polaris, not interfered, just aligned with. So it just made it so, couldn't physically be where I wanted to be ideally. But for Polaris Dawn, I was in California for a wedding. And then for Flight 5, I was at one of my best friends since 2nd grade's wedding in New York. So I had to stream from a hotel. I had to try to be quiet because it was really early. Paper thin little, hotels in New York are these tiny little closets for a hotel room. So yeah, I streamed from there, and I was not able to see it despite our team getting what has to be said is the best footage of any mission I've ever seen in my entire life. I am so freaking proud of the Everyday Astronaut / Cosmic Perspective team, and I'm sure you guys have heard this a million times, but you know that we've worked together now since, oh God, forever, basically, since 2020 really, and we like to kind of still keep things, we're kind of under one roof more or less. You know, Cosmic Perspective is primarily Mary Liz Shalinsky and Ryan Shalinsky, but with just a handful of other people, including technically like Andrew Keating and John Pisani and Nick and Jakubik, and you know, but we're kind of all under one roof, and we sort of just have these operating agreements where we share and overlap like on 99% of things. So it's kind of a cool way to be able to still have some individuality, where Ryan and the gang can kind of do things how they want to do and still post and share their footage. And then Everyday Astronaut, we kind of, you know, we just sort of, it's all one big giant pot. So when I say our team, I normally am including like the whole, there's about, you know, anywhere from 10 to 15 of us that are covering these launches. So unfortunately I was not there, but the rest of the team was. And as you hopefully saw by now, we got some of the coolest footage of any rocket launcher that I've ever seen in my entire life. So yeah, huge props, especially to Ryan. He finally nailed the ultimate tracking shot that he's been looking to get ever since we started doing some telescope tracking. I know he was really happy. We're all really happy. The community is very happy. That was amazing. So yeah, there's my little rant about having to miss the craziest thing ever. I will obviously be at the next one, pretty much no matter what. So it's hard though, guys. I gotta admit, just, you know, since this is a podcast and you're just listening to me rant around about things, it is really hard. And I feel like the most weight for people like Jack Beyer and like some of the NSF people, and well, even Mary Liz and Ryan, and trying to revolve your entire life around Starship and a floating schedule and all that stuff is really hard. It's, even for me, you know, I only really try to dedicate physical presence for when there is a launch, or sometimes when we're doing like upgrades and stuff, I fly down and help build stuff out and do some things. But for the most part, I'm pretty much only down there for the launches. And it's really honestly hard with a moving time scale like that to try to work your life around that and put anything on the calendar. Like putting a single thing on the calendar is like a nightmare, like gives you a panic attack almost, because you're like, oh God, what if Starship happens? And I'm right back at that now, because Flight 6 is likely right around the corner. We're looking at, you know, rumors, or, well, not rumors, we know that apparently the FAA basically gave license Flight 6 already, which was the biggest holdup for Flight 5. And as of the recording of this video, just the other day, or just last night technically, they did the static fire already of booster 13. So Flight 6's booster, we already know they've done the static fire for the ship a long time ago. So they are just cruising, and there's a chance that they could fly this thing like mid-November already, assuming they don't make any big changes to the mission profile, because basically it's the license is pretty much for the same thing as Flight 5, which includes a catch again, which is awesome. But it's unsure, you know, those of us not inside of SpaceX and the FAA don't know what exactly they could do outside of that, that exact license that would be new and unique. So with that being said, let's actually get to our first question, because we were talking about this in Discord, and in our Everyday Astronaut Discord, which, by the way, thank you for our Patreon members that are also in the Discord, keeping it a fun community. I've always really enjoyed just popping in there. I'm in there pretty much every day, answering questions and hanging out. And there's a good little discussion here in Enigma Star and Sketchy. Here's the kind of the two, they kind of went together. So Enigma Star in the Discord said, given that the Starship upper stage vehicle has already made it to splash on successfully twice in spite of flap damage, how many more missions do you think will fly before they attempt to catch it? And perhaps, lastly for me, Starship has already demonstrated twice the ability to relight Raptor after a fiery descent and period of microgravity. Shouldn't that count as having met relight requirements otherwise? We'll get to those, but on top of that, Sketchy in our Discord asked, I'm curious about how SpaceX is going to make Flight 6 valuable while waiting for Block 2 hardware to be ready for, I would guess, Flight 7. So let's see. Let's start off. We're kind of more on Sketchy's question here. So, so what else can they do with this exact same license before they fly V2? Which the second version of Starship, which has those little bit different nose flaps, are kind of tucked back behind, just in a little bit different position, which is cool because hopefully it'll keep them out of the direct plasma flow on reentry. Which would be awesome. So to answer the question then for Sketchy, what can they actually do differently before waiting for that? So realistically, what the FAA is going to want, they don't want the vehicle to change its flight plan really drastically, right? So the biggest thing is, what is the risk to the public? And when they make these exclusion zones, they include the likelihood of the vehicle, like if something were to go wrong, where would debris fall, right? And so obviously with the upper stage, when you have it re-entering over the Indian Ocean, you need to make sure that it re-enters where they say they're going to re-enter. And they have this very, very long corridor, like maybe even like hundreds of kilometers. I don't remember the exact dimensions, but it's a long corridor. And frankly, here's what's interesting. If you've ever played Kerbal Space Program, you probably have a sense of this, but when you re-enter and when you're already like in orbit, and then if you need to try to re-enter, it takes a lot of energy to drastically change your re-entry position, especially like in the case, changing your inclination. So in the case of like coming down at like a 30-degree angle or whatever it's doing in the Indian Ocean, if you're to change like north and south wise, that takes a lot of energy, a plane change like that. So that's why it's normally fairly not wide. It's pretty narrow re-entry corridor, but it's normally like really, really long. So it's, like I said, maybe hundreds of kilometers long, because they need to be able to basically calculate, okay, what happens if this thing breaks up on reentry right away? What's the highest, I guess the lowest terminal velocity? Like what's the most amount of drag? So if the vehicle broke up and it's now scattered pieces everywhere, like, some of those flaps would decelerate very quickly because they're pretty low density, or a single sheet of metal is going to decelerate very quickly and basically, re-enter at the first part of that entry corridor. The other option is, okay, what if this thing like stays, super intact and it doesn't aero brake as much as it should have, blah, 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 blah. What's the furthest point that it could re-entry on that corridor, on that trajectory? So they basically calculate all that out and say, okay, here's kind of the safest spot that keeps everyone safe on this end of things and on that end of things. So SpaceX has some wiggle room as far as like trying to re-enter. And as we know, Flight 5, Starship landed basically pinpoint landing right where they wanted it to land, which is really good as far as moving forward to eventual booster catch. But what can they do differently? So I think they could still potentially attempt a relight, which would be good. It'd be a brief relight. If I recall, I think I remember hearing oh God, I don't even remember now if it was 1 second, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, a small amount of time doing a very mild orbit, change, which would keep it within that trajectory. Now you could either, initially target a little bit longer, like towards the outer edge of that trajectory, and then have to basically slow down and it'd shorten your reentry point, or you could do it the opposite way, where you aim for the entry point, like the shallowest, the closest point of your reentry corridor, and then do a prograde burn and end up, going a little bit further downrange into your reentry corridor. So I don't quite remember what the current plan is. I've heard different things. I think for one of this IFT2, it was originally going to be like they aborted it once they realized they didn't have control of the relight. And I think they're going to do a retrograde burn. So I would assume that could be still worked in and used with this license, would potentially be a relight in space. But the other thing they could start doing things like, okay, we know now what a nominal, reentry profile looks like. What if we change the attitude of the vehicle? Can we demonstrate, like a steeper approach? Can we demonstrate, doing some roll maneuvers that are within what, expected bounds, but what's that actually look like during reentry? And is there valuable data in knowing, all right, well, here's our limits on, like, okay, if we extend the flaps out this much, dang, reentry peak heating gets this, or dang, the G-forces, shoot up to this level, or wow, we actually don't have as much control authority at that angle as we thought we would? You know, is there some value in changing that trajectory just to calculate data? Because Flight 6 is, again, the payload is data. There's nothing of any value other than just kind of trying to figure out how to make Starship work. So, you know, from that point of view, Flight 6 is more or less going to be a repeat. And maybe we'll see if there's going to be a Raptor relight. I think that's about as far as we'd see it change. It'd be like, you know, potentially just some change in the reentry profile, maybe, making that up. Maybe we'd see some other, you know, tech demonstrations, maybe more like internal prop transfer, and maybe a relight. And so to the question posed during our Discord by Enigma Star had asked, if, you know, since they've already quote unquote demonstrated it twice, the ability to relight Raptor after a fiery descent, wouldn't that count as microgravity? No. So Starship has, yes, now lit its engines twice after descent, the upper stage, and the booster has now lit its engines for a landing burn, what, 3 times now? I think 3 times, or I don't remember if Flight 3 actually ended up lighting. I think it tried to light its engines and it just kind of kerplutzed. But for sure, you know, we've got like 4 or 5 times of relighting a Raptor, but those are not in microgravity environments. They are under a lot of deceleration from deceleration, or in the case of Starship, it's kind of terminal velocity. So it's basically at 1G. Like it's chilling, you know, drag is met by gravity, they cancel out. You end up with, you know, slightly off of 1G, but you're not in microgravity. You're not experiencing free fall. You're experiencing deceleration, because you're slowing down, you know, as you re-enter the atmosphere. The atmosphere is thick, there's drag, you know, you feel that. It's not in total free fall when it's lighting its engines, and especially the super heavy boosters that, like, I don't remember, you know, it's slowing down drastically. You watch the graph of, you know, the telemetry on the velocity as the super heavy's coming through the atmosphere is slowing it down a lot. So it's almost treating, you know, it's experiencing negative deceleration or acceleration, so it's actually in higher than 1G, or potentially higher than 1G. And so the fluid is settling at the bottom of those tanks during the super heavy, you know, landing. So the Raptor so far has not ever done a proper 0G relight. It's always been under some kind of, you know, aerodynamically decelerated state, and it's lighting under, you know, kind of more terrestrial lighting conditions. So they have not ever had the opportunity to do a 0G light. But what it really does mean, you know, for Starship or for any on-orbit relight, you do have to do some kind of ullage tank, you know, propellant settling management. So they'll have to likely vent the, you know, warm gaseous oxygen, or potentially methane, but probably oxygen, vent that out. And that will scoot the ship so that all the, you know, gas goes on one end, and the more dense propellant to the liquid sinks towards the bottom and towards the inlets of the engines. And that's, you know, what we'll see do for a relight. You'll have to do some kind of maneuver like that. Don't forget, I do have that video on how do you start a rocket engine. There's a lot to, you know, not only starting a rocket engine, but starting a rocket engine in space in 0G has even more requirements, and just it's just trickier. So you have to, you know, worry about the settling of propellant and what to do with the, you know, the gas and the liquid in the tanks. So I do hope that we see that on Flight 6. I think that could be a very cool milestone to see accomplished. So we'll see. Yeah, so that's kind of that. And then I think there's one more kind of thing. So Enigma Star's first part of Enigma Star's question was basically, you know, that now that we've seen re-entries, how much longer before we see a catch attempt of Starship? So here's the deal. Starship is still, you know, burning material on re-entry. It's still having burn through on the flaps. It's still, you know, it's controlled. Yes, it's landed basically where they want it to land. But, you know, if you think about it, like, if you're overflying populated areas and you have a hunk of steel fall off at altitude, at you know, you know, orbital velocity initially, and obviously it'll slow down. But still, if you have a, you know, you forget, it's easy to forget how heavy and big Starship is. And if a chunk of steel could be, you know, a 400 kilo piece of steel that could fly off and then just come tumbling down over populated areas, and all of a sudden you have this hunk of what was once a flap, you know, like a a sheet of a flap. You know, like even look at like the chines cover that fell off. It looks like a piece of paper flying off in our footage, but that is like 3 millimeter thick stainless steel. You could go up to those pieces and you wouldn't even be able to pick it up. It's so heavy. It's like, you know, like 100 or 200 kilos worth of stainless steel. It's crazy dense and heavy and slicey and scary and a giant paper cut, you know. So it's not something that you want to have falling off of a vehicle while it's overflying populated areas. So I think that Starship won't be doing an orbital full once around catch attempt and flying over the Rio Grande Valley and Brownsville and all that stuff until they can get it back down to the ground without losing anything a few times, because that really is the risk is having a giant, I mean, those are big pieces of metal. You don't want that falling in the middle of a densely, I mean, there's Rio Grande Valley, even on the US side, has like 2.5 million people living there. It's extremely dense once you get from Brownsville all the way over to, you know, to McAllen area. And beyond that, even if it's very dense actually. And I know it doesn't seem like that because it's kind of spread out. It's long, it follows the Rio Grande River. But man, like you don't want a piece of metal. And obviously there's still the Mexico side there too that's also extremely dense with Matamoros and stuff. So I think we'll see, you know, 2 or 3, I think we'll need to see 2 or 3 more re-entries and need to have at least 2 of those go like extremely well. And by extremely well, I mean like literally nothing, but you're always going to see a few sparks. You're always going to see a few little tiny appendages, you know, little welding, you know, sticks or like little welding marks and edges of unfinished metal that are going to kind of break off in re-entry, tiny little flakes, just like on a grinding wheel. You know, if you're grinding metal and you see those little sparks and you see those flying off the vehicle, that's going to happen. That's just, and pieces even of the heat shield are going to kind of abrase and ablate off a little bit. You know, that's going to happen no matter what. But I'm talking about large chunks of metal. It's just got to land more intact, I think, in order to really safely overfly populated areas. That's my gut feeling. I guess we'll have to see. So those were actually the main Starship questions that I wanted to answer. Oh, and actually on this, there's from from William Kimball asking exactly this on X, which is at WK053086. How will they eventually catch if the ship is coming in hot over populated areas like Mexico and Texas? It's easy to imagine the booster coming back safely over the Gulf, but not so much the ship coming in after being in orbit. Thanks for the podcast. That's exactly, I think I just went through it entirely. That's exactly the question. So, like I said, it's just gonna have to be proven in flight, you know, a handful of times, more than twice. I would say the first one definitely didn't qualify. I would say they'd want to have 3 where they knew no hunks of metal came off that could be, you know, injury to people or property. So to appease the FAA, they're gonna have to really show like, hey, we got this thing down in one piece, multiple times. So that hopefully answers that question. This is from UFF_dad on Patreon. Thank you so much for your Patreon support. Asking, do you have any idea on how many sensors for data collection are on rockets? Like the heat tile test, are there dozens of temp sensors, hundreds, thousands? What beyond video launches like Starship? What beyond video do launches like Starship have? I can imagine the types, pressure, force, temperature, etc., but have not any idea on scale on how many they use. Any insight would be great. Okay, so I can't directly answer this because I don't know the exact amount, but what I can do is I can answer for you. I can answer a question with kind of a question or kind of an observation. So I'm in Austin right now, and last weekend I went to the Austin GP, and I may or may not have had a chance to go into a Formula One garage. And let me tell you, Formula One and rockets science is like hand in hand. I mean, they're both just pushing the boundaries of engineering, trying to get the last nth degree of every bit of performance, especially when you're, talking about performance to weight benefits. And also, the other thing that's very similar between F1 and rockets is the data collection. And something I did not know is that the floors of a car, of a Formula One car, basically act, you know, I did know. I knew that they were basically a giant suction cup, right? They use the Venturi effect, and that's what the ground effect car era is all about, is literally taking the airflow underneath the car and having it stick to the ground. You know, and that's actually one of the biggest providers of downforce. Sorry if you're not a Formula One fan, I promise this is going somewhere. But what I didn't realize, you know, I knew that that's how these cars work, but what I didn't realize is that even the floors have like hundreds of pressure sensors, hundreds of pressure sensor ports connected to data. So the teams can literally see, like, holy crap, you know, this is the amount of downforce, this is the temperature and pressure of the airflow running through here at 250 kilometers an hour, whatever they have to correlate it. That's huge. That's like, I had no idea that there's like that much data collected. I think there's tens of thousands of channels of telemetry and data being given to the engineers during a race. So I imagine that rockets are very similar. You know, I think, you know, for sure tanks have like, you know, every tank has dozens of sensors just for pressure and temperature. There's even strain gauges on tanks. There's, you know, there's obviously like electrical loads. Yeah, just, I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what all it is. But a lot of it is pressure and temperature, which are closely related and directly related. And, you know, things like flow rates and RPMs and, I mean, just, you know, valve positions is a huge one for like all sorts of valves. There's, I would imagine a vehicle like Starship has, again, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of channels of telemetry altogether, all said and done, which is very hard to fathom, but that is what we're dealing with here is, you know, that's why, like, when an anomaly happens in spaceflight, you rarely hear a company saying, yeah, we realized from our onboard footage or from our tracking footage. It's almost always like, oh, we just saw it in the data. Here's what happened. And they typically can come to the conclusion almost immediately from the data. And when not, you know, I think one of the craziest ones was when Falcon 9 had an upper stage anomaly way back in 2016 with the AMOSat 6, where it was sitting on the launch pad with a payload on top, which SpaceX kind of changed their fueling procedures after that, but they were preparing to do a static fire, and all of a sudden the upper stage out of nowhere blew up, and there was like rumors for a while that, like, yeah, maybe there was people saw a sniper or something, and they think that ULA might have tried to take out the rocket because, you know, it's such big competition that there's a ULA sniper. So if you've ever heard the memes of ULA sniper, that's where that comes from, is Amos 6. And I think that was, if I remember correctly, I'm doing this off the top of my head, not looking at, I think it was like September 1st, 2016. I might be wrong, but around there. And so what's crazy is they actually had some video footage of this. You know, obviously all the cameras are running on the launch pad. There's also a public source that had a camera pointed at the rocket during this, and they actually got in deep trouble and lost some of their credentials for on-media or on-pad access because they were not supposed to be filming where and when they were filming. But yeah, there was multiple sources that had video files of, you know, of what happened, and it just shows this upper stage out of nowhere just blowing up, like just massively exploding, like not even, I don't even know how else to say, like it just went up in flames out of nowhere. And, you know, the video files are only good for something, but the reality is they ended up tracking it down, basically using all of the sensors to act like a microphone array to ping the exact location, like triangulate the exact position of where this happened, so they could track by the millisecond, you know, where the source of this was. And they linked it to a single COPV, so composite overwrap pressure vessel, that was inside of the oxygen tank of the second stage of the Falcon 9. And they were literally able to triangulate it and get its position down so precisely, they knew like the exact region of the COPV that failed. And what they ended up doing is they went through all their testing. This is when they were first introducing super chilled propellants. So you may have heard of that. That's where they chill the LOX, the liquid oxygen, even colder than just like getting it down to a liquid state. Like they get it down to not slushy, like not into getting down to it being solid or anything, but lower temperature, closer to a solid. Same with the RP1. They chill it to be ultimately more dense. And by having it be more dense, you know, even if it's 2, 3, 4% more dense, that's just like, you know, you're packing more punch for the same amount of volume. So it is a pretty big performance increase. And what they were doing during this, they were originally, and I might have this wrong, I don't remember if they were filling the helium tanks first and then filling the liquid oxygen tanks or vice versa. I think I know what it was. I think they were filling the liquid oxygen tanks and then filling the helium tanks, which are sitting inside of the liquid oxygen tanks. And liquid helium is very cold. It's even colder than liquid oxygen. It's if I remember, is it colder than, yeah, I think it's colder than hydrogen even. Yeah, I think it's colder than hydrogen, which is why you run it to purge systems on a hydrogen engine. But okay, anyway, they filled it up and they realized that there was chunks of liquid oxygen getting stuck in, like liquid oxygen was soaking into the carbon fiber molecules of the COPV. And then when it touched the liquid helium, like just, via conduction of the internal COPV structure, it would make the liquid oxygen freeze solid and make it into chunks of oxygen, which then would break the carbon fiber bonds, and boom, it would have a rupture of the COPV, like an instantaneous. It would go, just break apart the bonds of the COPV and instantly rupture, and there goes your upper stage. And they solved that anomaly. Sorry, this is a long rant about data collection, but yeah, they solved that anomaly through data and all of the internal data of all the different sensors. And they did not solve it, I don't think they might have correlated it with video footage, but they solved it almost entirely using onboard telemetry of pressure and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my fun story. So like I said, I don't know the number of how many hundreds or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or thousands of thousands. I have no idea. It's a lot. There's a lot of sensors, a lot more than I can even imagine. And yeah, that's all has to run back through ground tracking stations and relay stations, and potentially even, these days, since Starlink has been so incredible, I assume they're also transmitting that data along with Starlink, because it's had, tons of bandwidth. Data on its own actually isn't, very heavy. The video is actually a lot more bandwidth. You have millions of pixels in a 4K image, so that's, megabits of information per second. So, like I said, or likely 10 to 20 megabits of continuous data flow to get, decent 4K imagery. And you could have millions of lines of data for individual sensors for that same amount of bandwidth. So there's likely a lot. There's a lot. And that brings us to our final question, which was, this is just from Tonda Tonic or something like that, at TONDATONC over there on X / formerly known as Twitter, asking, how long did you train to not talk about SpaceX in Blue Origin? So the question being, when I toured Blue Origin with Jeff Bezos, how hard did I have to try to not mention SpaceX? The honest 100% truth, I know this might be hard to believe, honestly, I never considered it. I did not even put one morsel of energy into not mentioning SpaceX. During these tours, I'm focusing, I've obviously done tours with Stoke and RFA and ESAR and Rocket Lab and Firefly and Ursa Major. When I'm doing tours of other places, I'm not just sitting there going, well, over at SpaceX, they're doing X, Y, and Z. That doesn't make for a fun interview. And it's not that I'm censoring it. It's just that I'm staying in the conversation. And if it's topical, there was actually a time where Jeff actually brought up, I think he said, Falcon Heavy, where they land the boosters and stuff. And when he said that, I was like, oh yeah, duh, right there. It was surprising because I wasn't in SpaceX world. My brain was, it always is in SpaceX world because it's kind of the industry standard and it's saturating absolutely every drip of everything. But the reality is that I honestly just wasn't really thinking about SpaceX during that interview. And, Blue Origin has a lot of relatively novel things that are different from what SpaceX is doing with New Glenn. And it's not really a conscious thing. I definitely was not told by Blue Origin, hey, don't mention SpaceX during this interview. That was never a thing. They didn't request anything of me. They were super chill, actually, which is kind of surprising. But yeah, that's not a thing, and I don't think I'd have that kind of brain power to be able to do that, to be honest. I think you guys know from my interviews that my brain and conversation, just my mouth goes wherever it may go. I have no control over that. And like, if they had told me not to say anything about SpaceX, it'd probably been a lot worse. It probably would have accidentally just been like, yeah, SpaceX also lands rockets, you know, and that would have been maybe just as comical. So really hard to tell, to be honest, but guy running by me there. So yeah, that's the whole story there, and I hope that answers your question. So yeah, I think I've gone on long enough. These I always end up just ranting, and my walk is almost done anyway. So yeah, if you guys let's do the normal spiel here on the outro. So thank you so much for listening. We likely will have Flight 6 coming up here soon, and hopefully we get even more spectacular shots, more angles, and you know, more everything during that flight. And I hope you guys are ready to tune into that. And I have to say thank you to all of you that tuned in with us, even though I was not there in person. Still so proud of the 4K webcast that we were able to produce. If you look at our shots, like our live shots, even versus SpaceX shots, like they are honestly the only shot that SpaceX has that absolutely blows ours out of the water is their last, like the drone shot of the landing is unbelievable, the coolest thing ever. But other than that shot, I think some of our shots are on par and absolutely incredible. So proud of our team. Can't wait to do that again for Flight 6, and I hope you guys are ready to watch that, watch history again, and just cheer on the progress. And thank you so much for those of you who tune in. And again, so proud of our 4K streams. It's really a big deal, and it takes a lot of work, as you know. So thank you for those of you guys listening. Still working on the Apollo video. That has, it's an hour and 45 now, which is actually good because it stayed that way. Actually, I think there's about 4 minutes being added, but it stayed that way now for a few months as I'm just going through the massive amount of B-roll that needs to be added. So it is a beast. I've been doing it full time now again for a week and a half after the booster catch video. So it's been the top of the thing now. Really trying to turn it out here before like mid-November. I want to have that done so I can get back to easy videos, and hopefully you guys enjoy that. So thank you so much to everyone that supports over on Patreon, and ex-subscribers and YouTube members. You guys are amazing, and thank you for listening. If you enjoy this podcast, consider giving it a review over on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you listen. It makes a difference. So love you guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Oh, and lastly, don't forget, by the time you're hearing this, yeah, it won't be too late. We still have early bird Astro Award tickets for sale through November 1st, 10% off. We're already selling out. Our Apogee tickets are sold out. Orbital tickets are almost sold out. And we're like half sold out on everything else. So that's just early bird. Once we announce the lineup, they will sell out. Absolutely. So if you want to come to our space conference where we have panels and then give out physical awards to some of the most exciting missions of the year in Austin, Texas on January 25th and 26th, be sure and get your tickets now at astroowards.live. And yeah, seriously, literally, if you're hearing this and you want to come, do it right now, astroowards.live, because they absolutely will sell out this year. And it's 2 days, tons of panels, tons of awesome guests. You're going to absolutely love it. So yeah, that's going to do it for me. I'm Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut. Hope you join me on another spacewalk. All right, bye everybody.